When the zombie outbreak started, the fluorescent lights above bed 7 had been flickering for 3 hours before anyone thought to check if something was wrong with the power grid. I remember that detail because I was lying beneath them, counting the stutters like a metronome, trying to distract myself from the fire crawling up my left ankle. Broken in 2 places, a spiral fracture of the fibula and a hairline crack along the talus. The orthopedic surgeon was supposed to see me at 6 in the morning. It was 4:17 when the screaming started. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand something. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't prepared. I was a 34-year-old data analyst named Marcus Webb, lying in a hospital bed on the 4th floor of St. Jude Regional Medical Center with a temporary cast and a morphine drip that made the ceiling look like it was breathing. I couldn't walk. I couldn't run. And when the world collapsed around me, I was exactly where you'd never want to be. Surrounded by the sick, the dying, and the people desperately trying to save them. The first scream came from below. 2nd floor, maybe 3rd. It was the kind of sound that doesn't register as real immediately. Your brain categorizes it as television noise, as someone else's emergency, as a problem with a solution already in motion. I lifted my head from the pillow and looked toward the door of my shared room. My roommate, Gerald, 72, post-hip replacement, snoring like a chainsaw, didn't stir. 12 seconds later, another scream joined the first, then another. Then something that wasn't a scream at all, but a sound I'd never heard a human throat produce. Wet, guttural, like someone gargling gravel while choking. Nurse Diane Chen appeared in my doorway. I'd spoken with her twice during my stay. She was efficient, warm without being performative, and she had a habit of clicking her pen against her badge lanyard when she was thinking. She wasn't clicking anything now. Her face was the color of old paper, and her scrubs had a spray of something dark across the chest that I told myself was coffee. "Mr. Webb," she said, and her voice was the careful calm of someone trying not to shatter glass. "I need you to stay in your bed. We're initiating a lockdown protocol." "What's happening?" She didn't answer. She crossed to Gerald's bed, checked his IV line with mechanical precision, then moved to the door. Before she left, she paused with her hand on the frame and looked back at me with an expression I've spent months trying to name. It wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition. The look of someone who has just understood that the rules governing reality have been permanently altered. "Don't open this door," she said, "for anyone." Then she was gone, and I heard her sneakers squeaking rapidly down the hallway toward the nurse's station. I want to be honest with you. I didn't take it seriously, not in those first minutes. Hospitals have emergencies. They have codes. Code blue, code red, code silver. I assumed someone violent had entered the building. Maybe a patient had attacked staff. Maybe there was a chemical spill. My mind reached for explanations that fit the architecture of the world I understood. Gerald woke up. He blinked at me with rheumy eyes and asked what time it was. I told him. He asked if breakfast was coming. I said I didn't think so. He grunted and reached for the television remote on his bedside table. When he turned it on, the local news channel was showing aerial footage of a highway I recognized. Interstate 40, the main artery running east from the city. It was completely gridlocked. Cars weren't moving. Some of them appeared to be on fire. The anchor's voice was professionally composed, but I could hear the undercurrent. The slight tremor. The careful selection of words like disturbance and unconfirmed reports, and authorities are advising residents to remain indoors. Gerald looked at me. I looked at Gerald. And somewhere below us, glass shattered with a sound like winter breaking. The next 40 minutes were a study in disintegration. I lay in my bed, listening to the hospital transform. Sounds that had been distant became closer, not gradually, the way a storm approaches, but in lurches. Silence, then chaos 3 floors down. Silence again, then running footsteps directly above. The PA system activated twice. The first time, a voice I didn't recognize announced a code silver. Active threat, shelter in place. The second time, the announcement cut off mid-sentence with a sound like the microphone being dropped. Gerald had stopped watching television. The broadcast had switched to an emergency alert screen, that harsh tone pulsing every 8 seconds. He was sitting upright in his bed, both hands gripping the rails, staring at the closed door with the intensity of a man who has survived wars and recognizes the sound of one beginning. "Son," he said without looking at me, "can you walk at all?" I'd been given crutches. They were leaning against the wall beside the window, aluminum and rubber, impossibly far from my reach. I swung my good leg off the bed and felt the morphine tilt the room sideways. My left ankle pulsed with heat. I can try. Then try, because whatever's happening out there is coming up. He was right. I could hear it now, the stairwell. Our floor had 2 access points, the main elevator bank and a fire stairwell at the eastern end. The sound coming from that stairwell was footsteps, but not the organized footsteps of evacuation. These were arrhythmic, stumbling, accompanied by that wet vocalization I'd heard earlier. Closer now, much closer. I reached the crutches by rolling off the bed and catching myself on the visitor's chair. The impact sent lightning through my ankle, and I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste copper. But I got upright. I got the rubber pads under my arms, and I stood there, swaying. A broken man in a hospital gown, staring at a door so that suddenly seemed like the thinnest barrier in the world. "There's a supply closet," Gerald said. He was trying to get out of his own bed, but his surgery had been only 2 days prior. His face went gray with the effort. "Diane showed me yesterday. Across the hall, 3 doors left. It locks from inside. I'm not leaving you. Boy, I can't move and you can barely stand. Don't be noble. Be smart." The door to our room didn't lock. It was a standard hospital room door, designed to be opened easily by staff at any time. I looked at it and felt something fundamental shift in my chest. The understanding that every design choice in this building had been made for a world that no longer existed. Easy open doors, wide hallways for gurneys, glass windows in every room for observation. This place had been built to heal people. Now it was a cage made of good intentions. I heard Diane's voice then, from the hallway, sharp and commanding. "Room 12, room 14, everyone mobile, move to the west corridor, now." I opened the door. The hallway was fluorescent and endless. That particular shade of institutional white that exists only in hospitals and purgatory. Diane was at the nurses' station with 2 other staff members I recognized. Omar, a young orderly with a shaved head, and Dr. Patricia Reeves, the attending physician who'd admitted me. They were pushing a medicine cart against the eastern stairwell door. And behind that door, something was pushing back. The metal was bowing inward with each impact, not dramatically, just a centimeter, then settling, then another centimeter, patient, almost mechanical. And the sound accompanying each push was breathing, except it wasn't breathing the way you or I breathe. It was a rattle, a death rattle sustained past the point of death. Diane saw me in the hallway and pointed west with her whole arm, a gesture that left no room for questions. "Supply wing, go, now." I went. I swung forward on my crutches, each step a negotiation with gravity. And I left Gerald behind in room 7 because I was afraid, and because he told me to, and because I've never forgiven myself. The western corridor of St. Jude's 4th floor was designed as a transitional space, connecting the patient rooms to the surgical prep area that served the operating theaters on 5. It was quieter here, insulated by an extra layer of concrete and soundproofing meant to keep surgical patients calm before procedures. Now that insulation served a different purpose. It muffled the sounds from the east wing just enough that I could think. 3 other patients had made it here. I found them in the surgical prep waiting area, a room with padded chairs and outdated magazines and a wall-mounted television showing nothing but the emergency broadcast. There was Sandra Okafor, late 40s, still connected to a portable IV stand that she'd somehow wheeled with her from her room. Her gown had a faded floral pattern, and her eyes were enormous behind thick framed glasses. There was also a teenager named Kai, maybe 16, with his left arm in a cast from wrist to shoulder, and an older woman named Ruth who sat perfectly still in the corner chair with her hands folded in her lap as though waiting for a bus. Kai spoke first. "What are they?" Nobody answered. We all knew what the television had shown before it went to emergency broadcast. We'd all seen footage from other cities in the preceding days, the incidents in Seoul, in Lagos, in Sao Paulo that the news had called mass hysteria events or coordinated violence. We'd all made the same comfortable assumptions: faraway problems, contained situations, someone else's apocalypse. "My mom's in surgery," Kai said. His voice cracked on the word surgery. "Upstairs, floor 5. Sandra looked at me as though I might have authority, perhaps because I was the only man present, perhaps because I was standing despite obvious injury, perhaps because humans in crisis seek hierarchy instinctively. I had nothing to offer her but the same terror she was feeling. "We need to barricade," I said, because it was the only actionable thought I could form. The prep waiting area had 2 doors, one leading back to the corridor I'd come from and one leading deeper into the surgical wing. The corridor door had a proper lock, a keycard system meant to restrict access to pre-cleared patients and staff. Sandra had been wheeled through it earlier for a procedure, but her keycard was back in her room. The door was currently propped open with a rubber wedge. I kicked the wedge out with my good foot. The door swung closed with a heavy mechanical click. The light above the handle turned red. Locked. For 20 seconds, we all just breathed. Then Ruth spoke from her corner, still motionless, still composed. "My husband is in the ICU, 3rd floor." She said it the way someone might note it was raining. Statement of fact, no request attached. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be sorry. Just tell me what you know." What I knew. Almost nothing. What I suspected. Everything. The reports had been escalating for weeks, isolated cases becoming clusters, becoming outbreaks. The language had shifted from violent episodes to infected individuals. To, in the darkest corners of the internet, the word no official source would use. The word Kai had almost said. An intercom crackled above us, not the main PA system, but a local surgical wing channel. "Doctor." Reeves's voice came through, distorted and breathy. "Anyone in surgical prep? This is Dr. Reeves. The East Wing is compromised. Do not attempt to access the main elevators. The stairwells between floors 2 and 4 are not safe. If you can hear this, stay where you are. We are working on an exit route from the roof. Repeat, stay where you are." The intercom clicked off. Kai sat down on the floor with his back against the wall and pulled his niece to his chest with his one good arm. Sandra adjusted her IV drip with trembling hands. Ruth remained perfectly still. And I stood on one leg in a hospital gown, gripping crutches, and tried to accept that the world I'd woken up in that morning no longer existed. That the hospital meant to fix my broken ankle had become the place where everything else would break instead. 2 hours passed before anything reached us. 2 hours of silence so complete that I began to wonder if we'd overreacted. If the Eastern Wing situation had been resolved. If authorities had arrived. If the sounds we'd heard were echoes of something already contained. The human mind reaches desperately for normalcy. It will manufacture hope from nothing at all. Sandra dozed against her IV stand, exhaustion winning against adrenaline. Ruth hadn't moved from her chair but had accepted water from a dispenser in the corner. Kai paced with the restless energy of someone his age, occasionally pressing his ear against the locked corridor door, reporting silence each time. I used the time to inventory. The surgical prep area gave us a water dispenser, a vending machine that Kai managed to break open with a fire extinguisher, protein bars, crackers, bottles of juice, and a cabinet of pre-surgical supplies. Sterile wipes, gauze, scissors, disposable scalpels sealed in plastic. I took 2 scalpels and put one in the pocket of my gown. It was absurd. A data analyst with a broken ankle holding a blade the size of a finger, preparing to defend against something he couldn't name. But absurdity was all I had. The sound came at 6:43. I know the time because I'd been watching the clock on the wall, counting minutes until the orthopedic surgeon would have seen me, in the reality that no longer applied. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. It was a soft, persistent scratching against the locked corridor door, like a dog wanting to be let in. Rhythmic, but not intelligent. Just repetitive. Mindless. The motion of something driven by impulse rather than thought. Kai backed away from the door so fast he nearly fell. His face went white beneath his brown skin. Something's out there. We all stood frozen, except Ruth, who finally moved, rising from her chair with deliberate calm and walking to stand behind me as though I represented any kind of protection. Sandra clutched her IV pole like a staff. The scratching continued, then stopped. Then the handle moved, just slightly, the electronic lock holding firm, but the physical pressure visible in the way the handle depressed a fraction of an inch. Whatever was out there understood doors, understood handles, understood the mechanism of entry, even if it couldn't execute it. Then another sound. A second set of scratching, this time from the opposite door, the one leading deeper into the surgical wing. I hadn't locked it because it didn't have a lock. It was a swing door, the kind that opens both ways, held closed only by its own weight. Something on the other side pushed it, and it swung inward 6 inches before settling back. Kai made a sound in his throat. Sandra whispered a prayer in Igbo. The door pushed again, 8 inches this time. Through the gap, I saw a hand. It was gray-blue, the color of a drowning, and it gripped the door's edge with fingers that moved in jerky spasms like a puppet controlled by someone learning the strings. Then a face appeared in the gap. A man, orderly scrubs, name tag still clipped to his chest, though I couldn't read it. His eyes were open, but wrong. Filmed over, clouded, the pupils blown so wide that no iris remained. His mouth was open too, and from it came that sound. That rattle. That sustained exhalation of air through lungs that seemed to have forgotten their purpose. He pushed through the door. I don't know what I expected from this moment. Hollywood had given me running corpses, slow shamblers, rage-infected sprinters. This man moved like someone relearning locomotion. Deliberate but uncoordinated. Each step a separate decision. His head tracking toward us with the slow certainty of a compass finding north. "Go," I said. "Back corner, behind the vending machine." Sandra moved first, dragging her IV stand. Ruth followed. Kai grabbed the fire extinguisher he'd used earlier. And I stood on my crutches between them and the dead man walking toward me, holding a scalpel in my right hand, understanding with absolute clarity that I was not equipped for what was happening, and that this knowledge changed nothing about what I had to do. The orderly, I could read his tag now, Jeffries, closed the distance between us with 6 unsteady steps. His head tilted at an angle that suggested his neck muscles were functioning asymmetrically, one side pulling harder than the other. His hands reached forward, not grasping but extended, palms up as though offering something. The rattle in his throat hadn't changed. Continuous, mechanical, like an engine idling in a body that should have stopped. Kai moved before I could stop him. He swung the fire extinguisher with his good arm, a wild lateral arc that caught Jeffries in the shoulder and sent him stumbling sideways into the row of chairs. The infected man went down in a clatter of metal legs and upholstery, but was immediately moving again, reorienting, that terrible head turn, tracking back toward the sound. Toward us. "The door!" I shouted. "Push the cart against the surgical door." Sandra, to her credit, understood instantly. She abandoned her IV stand and threw herself against the prep cart near the swing door, wheeling it into position to block any further entry. Ruth helped her, both women straining against the weight of stainless steel loaded with wrapped instrument trays. Jeffries was getting up. His arm moved at the wrong angle. Kai's hit had dislocated or broken something. But he rose regardless. Pain apparently irrelevant to whatever was driving him. I hobbled forward on my crutches, put all my weight on the right one, and drove the left crutch forward like a lance. The rubber tip caught him in the chest and pushed him back into the chairs again. He grabbed the crutch. His fingers closed around the aluminum shaft with surprising strength, and he pulled. I almost went forward with it, almost fell into him, into that open mouth, into whatever transmission waited in the rattle of his breath. I let go, lost the crutch, balanced on one leg and one remaining support, my broken ankle screaming as I shifted weight reflexively. Kai hit him again. This time from behind, the extinguisher coming down on the back of Jeffrey's skull with a sound I will never describe and never forget. The orderly dropped. The crutch clattered to the floor. Jeffries lay among the scattered chairs, still moving, fingers twitching, that rattle continuing from a prone position, but unable to rise. For 10 seconds, nobody breathed. "Is he?" Sandra started. "Don't get close," I said. I retrieved my crutch with difficulty, using the other to hook it toward me along the floor. "Don't touch him. Don't let any part of him touch you." "How do you know that's how?" "I don't know anything, but don't." We stood there, 4 strangers bonded by violence, watching a man who should have been unconscious or dead continue to animate on the floor of a surgical prep room. His movements were slowing, not stopping, but diminishing, like a wind-up toy running down. The rattle continued unchanged. Ruth stepped forward and looked down at him with an expression of clinical assessment that startled me. "He's wearing an ID badge. Radiology department. He came from downstairs." "The surgical wing connects to radiology on 3, Kai said. He was shaking, his good hand white-knuckled around the extinguisher. "There must be a stairwell or a ramp for the equipment." "Which means more could come that way," I finished. The swing door was blocked by the cart, but it wouldn't hold against sustained pressure from multiple bodies. The locked corridor door was secure only as long as the electronic lock held power. If the hospital's generator failed, everything opened. We needed a better position, somewhere with walls that weren't made of swing doors and observation glass. Somewhere with limited entry points and supplies and a route to the roof where Dr. Reeves had mentioned evacuation. "The operating theaters," Sandra said, reading my thoughts. "They're one floor up, sealed rooms, heavy doors, and they connect to the roof access corridor." She was right. The operating theaters on 5 were designed to be airtight, climate-controlled, isolated from contaminants. They were fortresses by accident, built to keep infection out in a context their designers never imagined. "Can we get there without the main stairwell?" I asked. Sandra smiled grimly. "I work in this hospital, Mr. Webb. I'm a surgical nurse. I know a route they don't put on the maps." Sandra Okafor was not a patient. She'd been receiving an IV infusion for an autoimmune condition, a routine treatment she scheduled every 3 weeks. She knew this hospital the way a river knows its banks. She'd worked here for 11 years, knew every maintenance corridor, every service elevator, every shortcut the orderlies used to move between floors without clogging the public hallways. She led us through a door I hadn't noticed, built into the wall behind the vending machine, painted the same institutional white, with a handle so flush it appeared decorative. It opened into a narrow service corridor, barely wide enough for a gurney, lit by caged bulbs and smelling of cleaning chemicals and old copper pipes. "Maintenance access," she explained, her voice low. "Runs vertically through the building. There's a freight elevator at the end that goes to every floor. And if the power's still on, it's our route to 5. The corridor was claustrophobic. My crutches barely fit side to side. Kai went first, still gripping the extinguisher. Sandra followed, having recovered her IV stand with a stubbornness I admired, dragging it behind her with the bag draped over her shoulder. Ruth walked with her hand on my arm, steadying me as much as drawing comfort. We moved in silence. The maintenance corridor was insulated from the hospital proper, but sound still penetrated. Muffled thumps, the distant keen of an alarm that had been wailing so long it had become background radiation. Twice we passed access doors to other floors. Through one, I heard the rattle. Through another, something worse. A human voice, begging, cut short. The freight elevator was at the corridor's terminus, an industrial unit with accordion gates and a capacity placard reading 2,000 pounds. Sandra pressed the call button. The mechanism groaned somewhere above us. The sound of an old motor engaging, cables tensing, counterweights shifting in their shaft. "If this opens and something's inside," Kai began. "Then we run," I said, realizing the absurdity even as the words left my mouth. I couldn't run. I could barely hobble. Kai had one functional arm. Sandra had a medical condition that left her fatigued. Ruth was 70 and moved accordingly. We were the least equipped survivors imaginable. The people that survival narratives leave behind in their first chapters. The elevator arrived. The gates opened. Empty. Thank God, empty. Just a scuffed metal floor, a hanging fluorescent tube, and a panel of buttons marked B through R. Sandra pressed 5. The gates closed with a rattle that made all of us flinch. The elevator lurched upward. "My mom's on 5, Kai said quietly. "Surgery was at 3 a.m. kidney transplant. She should be in recovery." Sandra touched his shoulder. "Recovery ward is on the east side of 5. The operating theaters are west. If she's there and she's stable, she's behind the same sealed doors we're heading for." Hope entered Kai's face like dawn entering a room. Fragile, tentative, but illuminating everything. The elevator stopped. The gate opened. The fifth-floor surgical wing was a different world from the patient floors below. Everything was cleaner, quieter, more controlled. The walls were tile rather than painted drywall. The lighting was brighter. And most importantly, the doors, the operating theater doors, were massive, pneumatic, designed to seal hermetically for procedures requiring sterile environments. We stepped out into a wide corridor with windows on one side overlooking the hospital's interior courtyard. Through the glass, I could see down into the atrium that connected all wings. What I saw there made Sandra grab my arm and pull me away from the window. I'd seen enough. The ground floor atrium, normally a space of potted plants and informational kiosks and volunteers offering directions, was full. Not full of people evacuating, full of what people had become. Dozens of figures moved in that slow, hunting drift, their bodies at wrong angles, their faces upturned, as though sensing something above them. And some of them were looking up, through the glass, at us. "Move," Sandra said. "They can't reach us here, but they know we're here now." Operating Theater 2 became our fortress. Sandra's keycard, still active, still blessed by whatever generator kept the fifth floor running, opened the pneumatic doors, and we entered a space designed for the precise business of saving lives. Now, it would serve the cruder purpose of preserving them. The room was large by hospital standards. The operating table dominated its center, surrounded by articulated lights and monitor arrays. Along the walls, supply cabinets, a scrub station, ventilation units humming steadily. 2 doors, the main entrance we'd used, and a smaller access leading to the adjacent prep room. Both sealed with the same pneumatic locks, both requiring keycard access. "These doors hold against biohazard protocols," Sandra explained, moving through the space with professional familiarity, opening cabinets and assessing contents. "They're rated to maintain negative pressure environments. Whatever's out there isn't getting through these." I sank onto a stool near the wall, my ankle throbbing with every heartbeat. The morphine fully worn off now, and nothing to replace it except the sharp clarity of adrenaline. Kai set down the fire extinguisher and immediately moved to the interior window, a narrow observation panel connecting to the prep room. "There are people in there," he said. We moved to look. Through the glass, in the prep room, 3 figures sat against the far wall. 2 women in surgical scrubs and a man in a white coat. They were alive, clearly alive, alert, their eyes tracking toward the window as they registered our presence. Sandra knocked on the glass. One of the women stood and approached. A brief exchange of gestures, Sandra pointing to the keycard pad on the internal door between our rooms. The woman in scrubs nodded. A moment later, the connecting door opened. "Oh, thank God," the woman said. She was young, mid-20s, her dark hair pulled back under a surgical cap still in place. Her tag read, "Dr. Amara Hassan, surgical resident." "We've been in here since it started. We couldn't reach anyone." The others followed her in. The second woman was a surgical tech named Joan Park. Compact, serious, with steady hands that hadn't lost their calm. The man was Dr. Leonard Cortez, an anesthesiologist, gray at the temples, moving with the contained tension of someone holding himself together through professional discipline alone. "How many of them are out there?" Dr. Cortez asked immediately. His voice was controlled, but his eyes betrayed him. They kept flicking to the main door, measuring its thickness, calculating. "Enough," Ruth said simply. "The whole hospital," Amara said. "At minimum, floors 2 through 4 are lost," Sandra answered. "We came up through maintenance. The main stairwells are compromised. The east wing?" "We heard it," Joan interrupted. Her jaw was tight. We heard everything. We gathered around the operating table, 7 survivors, each damaged in different ways, pooling knowledge like currency. Dr. Cortez had been preparing for a procedure when the first code silver was called. He'd sealed the prep room as protocol dictated for active shooter situations. Amara and Joan had been with him. They'd heard the PA announcements deteriorate. They'd heard the screaming move through the floors like water through a building, rising. "There was a patient in here," Amara said. Her voice changed texture, thinner, careful. "Mrs. Okonkwo, post-operative, kidney transplant recovery." Kai's whole body went rigid. "That's my mom." Amara looked at him. Something passed across her face. Recognition of the boy's age, of what she was about to say, of the weight words carry when the world has already broken. She was stable. She was recovering well. But when the code silver was called, the recovery ward was evacuated. They moved patients toward the East Wing. "The East Wing is gone," Kai said. "They might have gotten out before." "The East Wing is gone," Kai repeated, and his voice broke on the word like a bone under pressure. Amara didn't offer comfort. She held his gaze and nodded once, acknowledging the truth without decorating it. It was the kindest thing she could have done. The operating theater gave us something we hadn't had since the outbreak began. Time. The sealed doors held. The ventilation system continued cycling air. The generator-backed lights stayed bright and steady. For the first time in hours, we could stop reacting and begin thinking. Dr. Cortez took inventory of medical supplies, while Sandra attended to my ankle. She couldn't set it properly. That required imaging and an orthopedic surgeon, neither of which existed in our current reality. But she fashioned a proper splint from surgical materials and gave me a dose of ketorolac from the anesthesia cart that dulled the pain from inferno to bonfire. "You shouldn't be walking on this at all," she said, wrapping the splint with practiced hands. "I shouldn't be trapped in a hospital during the end of the world either. We're past should." Joan found food in the break room accessible through the prep area. A small refrigerator with someone's leftover lunch. Protein shakes stocked for long surgery days, a case of water bottles. Enough for a day, maybe 2 if we rationed strictly. Kai sat apart from the group, his back against the wall beneath the observation window, staring at nothing. Ruth sat beside him. Not touching, not speaking, just present. A silent testament that grief is not always best served by words. The 7 of us occupied the operating theater like castaways on a raft, each processing the situation through different lenses. Doctor Cortez was pragmatic, calculating resources, exits, timelines. Sandra was mechanical, solving immediate problems with her hands. Amara was analytical, asking questions, building a picture of what we faced. Joan was watchful, her attention never leaving the doors, the windows, the sounds beyond our walls. And Ruth was accepting, in a way that frightened me because it suggested she'd already concluded how this ended. I sat on my stool with my splinted ankle elevated and tried to think beyond survival. Survival was moment to moment, and moment to moment would kill us eventually. We needed a plan, a direction, an extraction point. "Dr. Reeves mentioned roof evacuation," I said, "before we came up. She was on the PA, said they were working on a route to the roof." "The roof helipad," Amara confirmed. "This hospital has one. It's directly above us. Floor 6, then roof access through the mechanical room. Military uses it sometimes for critical transfers." "Is there a helicopter coming?" Kai asked from his corner, and the hope in his voice was painful. "I don't know," Amara admitted. "But the helipad has emergency communication equipment. A radio, separate from the hospital system. If anything's still functioning out there, military, National Guard, anyone, we could reach them. Dr. Cortez shook his head slowly. Getting to the roof means leaving this room. This room is safe. Out there is not. This room is safe until the power fails, Sandra countered. These locks are electronic. Generator fuel is finite. How long? I asked. Hospital backup generators are typically rated for 72 hours under full load. She checked the clock, approximately 5 hours into the event. That gives us maybe 67 hours before every electronic lock in this building opens simultaneously. The silence that followed was absolute. 67 hours, less than 3 days. After that, the doors that separated us from the atrium full of the dead would simply open. Every sealed room, every locked ward, every barrier between the living and what lived in the spaces between, all of it would dissolve into nothing more than hinges and handles. We need to get to that roof, I said. Agreed, said Amara. It's 1 floor up, Sandra added. I know the maintenance route. Dr. Cortez looked at each of us in turn, his anesthesiologist's habit of assessing patient readiness finding grim new application. Not everyone here can make that climb quickly, he said, his gaze settling briefly on me, on Ruth. Then we make the climb slowly, Ruth said, rising to her feet with the deliberate dignity that had characterized her every movement since I'd met her. But we make it. I did not survive 73 years to die waiting. We planned for 2 hours. Sandra drew the route from memory on a whiteboard typically used for surgical notes, diagramming corridors, access points, distances, 1 floor up through the maintenance shaft, through the mechanical room, onto the roof. Simple in geometry, potentially lethal in execution. The maintenance corridor we'd used before extended vertically, Sandra explained, with service ladders connecting floors. Not a ladder that anyone with my ankle could manage. But there was also a secondary freight elevator shaft that continued to the 6th floor mechanical level. If the freight elevator still responded, we could ride to 6. If not, we'd need to find an alternative. Joan volunteered to scout. She was the most physically capable among us. Compact, fit, with a martial arts background, she mentioned casually, as though noting the weather. She took a scalpel, a flashlight from the surgical supplies, and Sandra's key card. 5 minutes, Amara told her. If you're not back in 5 minutes, then don't come looking, Joan finished. Her face was expressionless, but her hands were steady as she pressed the key card to the door panel. The pneumatic seal released with a breath of pressurized air, and Joan slipped through the gap sideways, minimizing the opening time. The door sealed behind her. We waited. I watched the second hand on the wall clock complete its circuit once, twice, 3 times. At 4 minutes, the door panel beeped. Joan's face appeared as the door opened, flushed but intact, her expression readable as cautious optimism. Corridors clear. Freight elevator responds. I called it to 5 and wrote it to 6. The mechanical level is accessible, and I could see the roof access door. There's one problem. Tell us. The 6th floor mechanical room has skylights. Some of them are broken. I could hear them below, in the courtyard. They're congregating around the base of the building. If they can climb, if they can reach those skylights. Can they climb? Dr. Cortez asked. Nobody knew. We go now, I said. Not in an hour, not after more planning. Now, before anything changes. Sandra nodded. I agree. Pack what we can carry. Water, food, medical supplies, anything that can serve as a weapon. We moved with purpose. Amara loaded a surgical bag with supplies, IV equipment, medications, bandages, suturing kits. Dr. Cortez took the portable defibrillator, reasoning that its battery could potentially be useful beyond its intended purpose. Kai took the fire extinguisher again, refusing to leave it behind. Ruth accepted a flashlight and a scalpel, with a nod that suggested she knew how to use both. I redistributed my weight on my crutches, testing the splint Sandra had made. It held better than expected. The pain was present, but the ketorolac had reduced it to something manageable, something I could file away while my body demanded motion. Sandra opened the operating theater door. The fifth-floor corridor was empty. The same tile walls, the same bright lighting, the same windows overlooking the atrium. I made the mistake of looking down through the glass again as we passed. They'd multiplied. The atrium was dense with them now, not standing still but moving in patterns that looked almost organized, circulating like a current. And among them, I saw white coats, scrubs, patient gowns, visitor clothing. The entire population of the hospital, transformed and restless, moving through the ground floor in their endless searching drift. One of them wore a hip replacement recovery brace. My stomach turned to ice. "Don't look," Ruth said beside me, her hand finding my arm. "Looking doesn't change it." She was right, and I hated her for being right, and I loved her for saying it. We moved on, past the observation windows, toward the maintenance corridor access that Sandra led us to with navigational certainty. Her keycard opened another hidden door, the same narrow service corridor as before, the same chemical smell, but now leading up rather than across. The freight elevator waited at the end, gates open, a metal box promising vertical escape. We filed in, 7 bodies pressed close in a space designed for equipment, not exodus. Sandra pressed 6. The elevator climbed. Below us, through metal and concrete, I could feel the hospital breathing with its new population. Rising. The 6th floor was never meant for patients. It was the building's brain stem. HVAC systems, water treatment, electrical distribution panels, the grinding mechanical hearts that kept St. Jude functioning. The air was different here, warmer, thicker, vibrating with the subsonic hum of large machinery. Emergency lighting cast everything in amber. The overhead panels dim compared to the clinical brightness below. We stepped out of the freight elevator into a corridor of exposed ductwork and concrete. Industrial yellow lines painted on the floor guided the way toward different mechanical zones. Sandra pointed left, toward a sign reading, "Roof access authorized personnel only." The group moved as a unit now, instinctively tightening. The open spaces of the mechanical level feeling more exposed than the sealed rooms we'd left. Joan led, scalpel in hand. I brought up the rear, my crutches echoing metallically against the concrete floor. Joan's warning about the skylights proved accurate within 30 seconds of our arrival. The mechanical room's ceiling was punctuated by 3 large skylights, industrial glass panels designed to provide natural light during maintenance operations. 2 of them were intact, showing gray dawn sky. The third was shattered, its frame empty, glass fragments scattered across the floor below, like scattered ice. Through the broken skylight, I could see nothing, just the pre-dawn dimness and the edge of the roof. But the opening was large enough for a body to pass through. And the question of whether the infected could climb suddenly became academic rather than theoretical. "Move fast," Joan said. "Stay away from beneath the brake." We skirted the edge of the mechanical room, following the wall toward the roof access door visible at the far end. The machinery around us provided partial cover. Large air handling units, pump assemblies, generator housings, but also created blind spots. Shadows pooled between units. The amber lighting left gaps of darkness that my imagination populated with every fear I'd accumulated. Halfway across, Kai stopped. "Listen." We froze. Above us, from the broken skylight, a sound. Not the rattle. Something different. Scraping. The sound of something dragging against roofing material. Then the edge of the skylight frame creaked under pressure that came from above rather than below. They were on the roof. The realization hit the group like a physical blow. Sandra's face went slack. Dr. Cortez stepped backward involuntarily. Even Joan, steady Joan, took a measured breath that spoke volumes. "How many?" I asked, directing the question upward as though the ceiling would answer. "Doesn't matter how many," Amara said, her voice tight. "If they're on the roof, the helipad might not be safe." "The helipad is at the opposite end of the building?" Sandra said, pulling the geography from her memory. "The roof is massive. It covers the entire hospital footprint. If there are only a few, they might be concentrated near this skylight, drawn by the opening. Or they might be everywhere up there," Dr. Cortez said. More scraping from above. Then, a shape at the skylight edge. A silhouette blocking the gray dawn, looking down. Head tilted, body still. That characteristic angular posture. It saw us. I know it saw us because its rattle. Started. That exhaled vibration rolling down through the broken frame and filling the mechanical room like fog. It didn't jump. It stood at the edge, looking down, rattling. And I understood something about them in that moment that I hadn't grasped before. They were driven but not reckless. They wouldn't throw themselves through a 2-story drop, even if they could see us. They weren't mindless. They were reduced, stripped down to core imperatives, but still operating with some vestige of physical self-preservation. "It can't get down," Joan said, confirming my observation. "But it knows we're here," Kai whispered, "and it's making noise." He was right. The rattle was a signal. Whether intentional or simply mechanical, it was audible. And if others were on the roof or in the building, they would orient toward it. We were being announced. "The roof access door," I said. "Now, we go up, we move fast, we get to the helipad before they converge." The roof access door was industrial steel, painted red, with a push-bar mechanism and a sign reading, "Alarm will sound." Sandra laughed at that. A sharp, mirthless exhale. Let it sound. What's another alarm at this point? She pressed the bar. No alarm came. The system was either disabled or the speaker was dead. The door swung outward onto a metal landing, and beyond it, dawn. The sky was the color of a bruise. Purple-gray, shot through with amber from fires burning somewhere in the city beyond the hospital's perimeter. I could see the skyline from here. Office towers, residential blocks, the elevated highway. Smoke rose from at least 4 distinct locations. Black columns twisting upward into a sky that didn't care. The roof itself was vast. A flat expanse of gravel and membrane, punctuated by mechanical housings, antenna arrays, and ventilation stacks. To our left, perhaps 200 meters away, the helipad occupied a raised platform. Its painted circle and aviation lights dark but visible. Between us and it, open ground, partial cover from equipment housings, and there, Joan said, pointing. 3 figures on the roof, spread apart, not clustered. One near the broken skylight we'd seen from below. Another beside an antenna array. A third motionless near what appeared to be a maintenance shed halfway to the helipad. They stood with that characteristic stillness, not sleeping, not waiting, just existing in their reduced state until stimulus moved them to action. "They haven't seen us," Amara whispered. "Wind's blowing our direction. They're not orienting." "3 is manageable," Joan said. Her voice carried a calculation I recognized. The mathematics of violence, the cold arithmetic of threat assessment. If we move quietly along the eastern edge, using the equipment for cover, we can avoid the 2 near the skylight and the antenna. The one by the shed is a problem. It's directly in our path. "I'll handle it," Kai said. "No," I said immediately. "I'm 16, not useless. I have 1 arm, and I'm still the fastest person here." He wasn't wrong. His youth and physical capability, even diminished by the cast, exceeded what any of the rest of us could offer in terms of speed and agility. But he was 16, and his mother was missing, and the fire in his eyes was grief wearing the mask of courage. "We go together," Ruth said. "All of us or none. I won't be left behind again, and I won't leave anyone else." Her words carried an authority that surprised me. Until I remembered, I knew nothing about this woman beyond her name and her composure. I didn't know what she'd survived before today. I didn't know what reserves she was drawing from. I only knew that when she spoke, we listened. We moved as a group, following Joan's eastern route. The gravel crunched beneath our feet, beneath my crutch tips, and I cringed at each sound. But the wind was in our favor, carry-stowing noise away from the infected figures, masking our passage with the ambient sounds of a building and city in collapse. The first 2 infected remained stationary as we passed. The one at the antenna was facing away, staring out over the edge of the building at the city below, as though watching something we couldn't see. The one near the skylight was oriented downward, head tilted into the opening, rattling at whatever it sensed below. The third, the one near the shed, was the obstacle. It stood between 2 ventilation stacks, facing our direction but not tracking us. Its eyes, those clouded, blown pupils, seemed to stare at a fixed point in the middle distance rather than focusing on anything specific. Joan signaled for us to stop. She crouched behind a large HVAC unit, studying the infected figure's behavior. "It's not reacting to visual input at this range," she whispered. "I think they're primarily attracted to sound and proximity." "Then we go wide," Sandra suggested. "Add 50 meters, arc around it." 50 meters of open ground, Joan countered. "If it turns." "It won't," I said, understanding something I couldn't fully articulate. "They don't patrol. They stand until something reaches them. We stay quiet. We stay distant. We pass." We arced wide. Every step measured, every breath controlled. The gravel was our enemy. Loose stones shifting and grinding beneath weight, producing small sounds that seemed enormous in the dawn quiet. I compensated by placing my crutch tips with surgical precision, finding patches of membrane between gravel sections, minimizing noise. Ruth moved with surprising grace. Her steps were light, deliberate, the movement of someone who had perhaps danced once, whose body remembered economy of motion even at 73. Kai was silent as a thought. Young joints, young muscles, the natural stealth of someone whose body obeyed without protest. We cleared the infected figure by 40 meters. It never turned. It stood in its fixed position, facing its fixed direction, locked in whatever loop drove its reduced consciousness. I watched it from behind as we passed, studied the slight movement of its chest, the minimal sway of its stance, the absolute absence of anything that could be called awareness beyond the base-level scanning that would activate upon sufficient stimulus. The helipad platform was elevated 3 feet above the main roof surface, accessible by a short ramp on its southern side. We reached the ramp and climbed it. 7 exhausted, damaged people ascending toward a circle painted on concrete, hoping it still meant something. Hoping the sky still held rescue. The helipad itself was empty. No helicopter, no supplies pre-staged, nothing but the painted circle, the aviation lights, and a small communications shed at its edge. The shed was what we needed. Sandra's keycard failed on its lock. Different system, different clearance. But the door was flimsy compared to the surgical theater. And Kai's extinguisher made quick work of the handle mechanism. Inside, a radio console, a basic weather station, emergency flares in a wall-mounted case, a first aid kit, and, crucially, a battery-powered backup radio that operated independently of the hospital's main systems. Dr. Cortez reached the radio first. His hands moved across the console with a confidence that surprised me, until he explained. Navy, 4 years, communications officer before medical school. He powered the unit up, adjusted frequency, and began transmitting. Any station, any station. This is a civilian emergency broadcast from St. Jude Regional Medical Center, rooftop helipad. We have 7 survivors, including injured. Hospital is overrun. Requesting immediate evacuation. Over. Static. The sound of empty air, of frequencies that should carry voices carrying nothing. He repeated the message. Changed frequencies. Repeated again. Changed again. His professional calm didn't waver. His hands remained steady, his voice even. But the corners of his mouth tightened with each unanswered call. They'll come, Kai said. Someone will respond, Amara agreed. I wasn't sure either statement was true, but I didn't voice my doubt. Instead, I moved to the edge of the helipad platform and looked out over the city. The dawn was fully breaking now. Gray light spreading across the urban landscape like a tide revealing what the darkness had hidden. The streets below were empty of moving vehicles, but full of moving figures. The hospital's parking lot, a vast expanse of asphalt I'd driven into just yesterday for my appointment, was populated with wandering shapes that caught the dawn light on their hospital gowns, their visitor badges, their white coats. The world beyond the hospital's borders was no better. I could see figures on the highway overpass, on sidewalks, standing in the intersections of the 4-lane road that fronted the building. There was nowhere to go, even if rescue came. The city was transformed, its population converted, its infrastructure silent. The fires burning on the horizon weren't being fought. The traffic lights still cycling through their colors governed nothing but the dead. I turned back to the group. Dr. Cortez was still transmitting. Sandra was organizing our supplies on the helipad floor. Amara was treating Kai's arm, which had swollen from the exertion. Joan stood guard at the platform's edge, scalpel in hand, watching the 3 figures on the roof below us for any change in behavior. Ruth sat against the communications shed wall with her eyes closed. We were alive. We were exposed. And the radio answered with nothing but the empty hiss of a frequency abandoned by the world. 4 hours on the helipad. The sun climbed the sky with indifferent regularity, heating the concrete beneath us, forcing us into the narrow shade provided by the communications shed. Dr. Cortez cycled through frequencies every 15 minutes, broadcasting our position, our numbers, our need. Nothing returned but static and, once, a brief burst of what might have been a voice. Garbled, distant, lost before meaning could be extracted. The infected on the roof had not moved. Their positions remained fixed, their rattles carried by wind that shifted direction as the morning warmed. As long as we maintained distance and quiet, They ignored us with the thoroughness of predators who had not yet detected prey. Hunger established itself as a secondary enemy. Our food supplies, the protein bars and shakes from the operating theater, sustained us in caloric terms, but offered no satisfaction, no comfort. We rationed regardless. Sandra enforced a schedule: water every hour, food every 3. Her nursing instincts translated seamlessly into survival logistics. Amara and I spoke quietly at the platform's edge, looking out over the city. She told me about medical school, the years of 18-hour days, the residency that consumed her 20s, the surgical career she was just beginning. "I spent 11 years learning to save lives in a building," she said. "Now the building is what's killing people." The building didn't do this. No. But it concentrated the victims, concentrated the infected, put the vulnerable exactly where the threat was. She paused. "It's like a perfect system designed in reverse. Everything that makes a hospital functional, easy access, central location, gathered population, makes it the worst possible place when the population becomes the threat." I thought about that, about the architectural irony of it, about all the design choices made with noble intent. Wide hallways, open wards, accessible rooms, becoming predatory features in a reality the designers couldn't imagine. About myself, coming here voluntarily yesterday with my broken ankle, walking into what would become a trap because I trusted the institution to perform its function. "Do you think it's everywhere?" I asked. Amara looked at the horizon, at the smoke columns, at the distant sounds of a city eating itself. "I think if it were contained, someone would have answered the radio by now." That statement settled into me like a stone dropping through water, disappearing into depth, generating ripples that would reach every shore of my consciousness eventually. Joan interrupted us. "Movement. The one by the antenna." We turned. The infected figure that had been stationed near the antenna array, the one facing outward over the building's edge, was moving. Slowly, its head was turning, rotating toward the helipad with that mechanical deliberation I'd observed before. It wasn't approaching. It was orienting. "It hurt something," Joan said. "We've been quiet," Kai protested. "The radio," Dr. Cortez realized. He'd been transmitting at low volume, but any sound in sufficient silence carries. The static itself, the hiss of an open frequency, was enough in an environment where all other human-generated noise had ceased. "Turn it off," Joan instructed. "If I turn it off, we lose our chance at contact. If you don't turn it off, they'll come here." Dr. Cortez looked at me. Why me, I didn't know. Perhaps because I'd become some kind of de facto decision-maker through no qualification other than speaking first. I looked at the figure by the antenna. It was still only orienting, not moving. But behind it, the figure by the skylight was also turning. 2 of 3 now facing our direction. "Lower the volume to minimum," I said. "Transmit on schedule, every 30 minutes, brief broadcast, then silence. Between transmissions, we say nothing above a whisper." Cortez nodded and reduced the output to barely audible. The infected figures held their new orientation but didn't advance. The equilibrium held, barely, delicately, like a coin balanced on its edge. We settled into whispered existence. 7 people trying to signal for rescue without being heard by the dead that surrounded them. The paradox was so precise, it might have been designed by a cruel intelligence. By afternoon, the dynamics shifted. Not on the roof. There, the infected remained statue still in their new orientations. But below, through the edge of the platform, looking down the building's side, we could see the ground floor exits. Figures were emerging from the hospital into the parking lot. A steady trickle, not organized but consistent, as though the building were slowly exhaling its transformed population. "They're dispersing," Joan observed, spreading into the surrounding area. "That's good for us," Sandra noted. "Fewer inside means fewer obstacles if we need to go back in." "Why would we go back in?" Kai asked. The answer hung unspoken. Because the roof had no long-term sustainability. No shelter from weather, limited food, water only from what we'd carried. If no rescue came, and with each passing hour of radio silence, that possibility calcified into probability, we would need to descend, re-enter, find a way out of the hospital and into whatever remained of the world beyond. Ruth, who had said nothing for hours, spoke from her position against the shed. "My husband is down there, in the ICU, 3rd floor." She said it without preamble, without emotional coloring, as a factual reminder. "If we go back in, I'm going to him." "Ruth," Sandra began, "I know what you're going to say. I know it's likely that the ICU was overrun with everything else. I know what I'll probably find. But I'm going." I watched her face as she spoke. There was no delusion there, no protective denial. She knew. She was choosing anyway. Choosing the certainty of knowledge over the mercy of ignorance. I understood it. I envied it. She had something worth descending toward, even if what waited was loss rather than reunion. The radio crackled at the next transmission window. Cortez broadcast our position, brief, precise, clinical. He released the transmit button and we listened to silence. 5 seconds. 10. Then a voice. Distant, distorted, but unmistakably human. "Copy. St. Jude survivors. Repeat. National Guard. Route 17. Extraction point." The signal broke apart in static. Cortez lunged for the radio, adjusting frequency, calling back. "National Guard, this is St. Jude rooftop. 7 survivors. Repeat, 7 survivors. Please confirm extraction point. Over." Static. A burst. Then clearer, just for a moment. "Not viable. Ground routes to St. Jude compromised. Cannot reach your position. Extraction point is Henderson Elementary, 1.4 miles northeast. Can you reach on foot? Over." 1.4 miles, on foot, through a city populated by the dead. I looked at my broken ankle, at Ruth's 73 years, at Sandra's fatigue and Kai's single arm, and the accumulated damage of a day that had already taken everything we had. Cortez responded, "Affirmative. We will attempt to reach Henderson Elementary. Timeline, over." The response was fractured. 2,200 hours, final extraction. After that, falling back to. Static consumed the rest. 2,200 hours, 10 p.m. We had roughly 7 hours to descend from the roof, exit the hospital, traverse 1.4 miles of infected urban landscape, and reach a school where a helicopter might or might not be waiting. 7 people looked at each other in the afternoon sun, and the silence between us was filled with calculation, not of odds, but of will, of what each person was prepared to endure for the possibility of survival. "Henderson Elementary," Sandra said. "I know where that is. Northeast, across the park." "Through the park," Amara corrected. "Through Riverside Park." "Through the park," Sandra confirmed. And the weight of that preposition, through rather than around, carried the full measure of what the journey would demand. "I'm going to the ICU first," Ruth said again. Quiet, immovable. "Ruth, we can't." Dr. Cortez started. "You can't. I can. Give me Sandra's key card and 15 minutes. 3rd floor. Then I'll meet you at the ground floor exit. The argument lasted 6 minutes. I know because I watched the clock in the communications shed while voices rose slightly above whispers, earning another degree of orientation from the figures below. Enough to remind us that even disagreement could kill us here. Dr. Cortez wanted to refuse. The risk was too high, the delay too costly. The probability of Ruth finding her husband alive too low to justify the expenditure of time and safety. He said this plainly, without cruelty, but without accommodation. Joan agreed with him. Strategic thinking, cold math, 1 life against 7. Sandra understood but couldn't support it. I can't give you my key card. Without it, none of us can access the maintenance corridors. We need it to get down. Then come with me, Ruth said to Sandra. Get me to 3. Give me 5 minutes in the ICU. 5 minutes to know. 5 minutes in a compromised ward. 5 minutes. Then I follow you out, whether he's there or not. I intervened, not because I had authority, but because I couldn't bear the calculus being applied to this woman's grief. We need to descend to ground level regardless. The route through maintenance passes the 3rd floor. We stop. Ruth looks. 5 minutes maximum. Then we continue together. Amara nodded first, then Kai, then Sandra, reluctantly. Dr. Cortez remained still, his face a mask of professional disagreement. But he didn't object further. Joan said nothing, which I took as consent from someone who reserved her words for necessity. Ruth looked at me. The gratitude in her eyes was weighted with something else. The understanding that I had just made a decision that could cost all of us our lives for the sake of one woman's need to witness. I accepted that weight. I'm still carrying it. We prepared to descend, gathered our supplies, redistributed loads. Joan took point. Kai took the extinguisher. Sandra carried the surgical bag and her key card like a talisman. Dr. Cortez took the portable radio unit, having disconnected it from the console. It would continue receiving on battery power, letting us hear any further transmissions. Amara helped me adjust my crutches, tightening the pads that had begun to rub my underarms raw. The freight elevator waited where we'd left it. 6th floor, gates open, interior empty. We filed in. Sandra pressed 3. The descent was 30 seconds. 30 seconds of mechanical groaning, cable tension, the tick of floors passing. When the elevator stopped and the gates opened, the maintenance corridor of the 3rd floor greeted us with darkness. The emergency lights here had failed or been broken. Only the faint spill of illumination from the elevator car pushed back the black. Joan's flashlight activated, cutting a white beam through the corridor. Empty. Silent. The chemical smell was different here, overlaid with something biological, something my hindbrain recognized before my conscious mind identified it. Which direction is the ICU? I whispered. Sandra pointed left. 40 meters, through the connecting door into the main ward corridor. ICU is at the east end of this floor. The east end, where everything had first gone wrong. Ruth stepped forward, taking the flashlight from Joan with a gentle hand on her wrist. 5 minutes, she said. I'll go alone. No, Joan said. I'll go with you. Everyone else stays here by the elevator. Ruth nodded. The 2 women, 73 and 30, separated by decades, but united by a strange determination, moved together into the darkness of the 3rd floor maintenance corridor and disappeared around the turn that led toward the ICU. We waited. Dr. Cortez by the elevator panel, ready to close the gates if anything came. Kai against the wall, extinguisher ready. Sandra beside me, her hand on my arm, both of us straining to hear beyond the silence. 1 minute, 2, 3. On minute 4, we heard Joan's voice. Not screaming, not frightened, but firm and clear in the darkness. "Ruth, it's time to go. Ruth, we need to go now." And then Ruth's voice, so quiet, I almost missed it. "I found him." They emerged from the darkness together, Joan's arm around Ruth's shoulders, guiding her, supporting her. Ruth's face was dry. Her eyes were open. She held something in her hand. A watch, gold-banded, catching the elevator light. Her husband's, I assumed, recovered from a wrist that could no longer tell time. She didn't speak. Joan gave a minimal shake of her head when I opened my mouth to ask. The question died before it formed. Some knowledge requires no articulation. We descended to the ground floor. The maintenance corridor terminated at a service entrance on the hospital's north side, a door used by delivery trucks and maintenance crews, opening onto a loading dock that faced away from the main parking lot. Sandra knew it would be less populated than the front entrance. The infected in the parking lot had exited through the main lobby, following the paths their living bodies had used daily. She was right. When we cracked the service door, the loading dock was empty. 3 delivery trucks sat silent in their bays, engines cold, cabs vacant. Beyond the dock, a service road led north toward a tree line that Sandra identified as the southern edge of Riverside Park. The air outside hit me like a revelation. All day inside the hospital's recycled atmosphere, I'd forgotten what the world smelled like. Now it smelled like smoke and gasoline, and something sweet and wrong that I didn't want to identify. But it was there. It was outside. It was the first step towards Henderson Elementary and whatever waited there. "The park is 4 blocks north," Sandra said, orienting herself by landmarks. "Through the service road, across Jefferson Avenue, then into the park. It's about 1 kilometer through the trees, then out the north side to the school." "Stay tight," Joan instructed. "No running unless we have to. Movement attracts them, noise attracts them. We walk. We walk quietly. We walk together. And we stop for nothing." I looked at my watch. 5:47 p.m. We had 4 hours and 13 minutes until the extraction window at Henderson Elementary, 1.4 miles. Under normal circumstances, a 25-minute walk. Under these circumstances, with my ankle, with Ruth's age, with the dead wandering every street. A journey measured not in distance, but in decisions. We dropped from the loading dock to the pavement. The impact sent a lance through my ankle despite the splint. I absorbed it, filed it, kept moving. The service road stretched ahead, narrow, sheltered by the hospital building on one side and a concrete wall on the other. No infected visible. We moved north. 7 people in a line, Joan at front, Kai at rear. The rest of us strung between like beads on a wire. The service road ended at Jefferson Avenue, and here we encountered our first ground-level test. The avenue was 4 lanes wide, bisected by a median, and visible for several hundred meters in each direction. On it, scattered, not concentrated, 12 infected figures moved in their characteristic drift. Some walked, some stood. One sat in the middle of the road with its legs extended, head rolling side to side, producing the rattle in a rhythm that almost resembled a song. "Spacing," Joan whispered. "They're spread out. If we cross midway between clusters, maintain silence, and move steadily." "Single file," Sandra added, "close to the ground." I couldn't crouch. My crutches demanded upright posture, and my movement was inherently louder than anyone else's. The rubber tips against asphalt, the rhythmic swing and plant. I was the liability. The loudest, the slowest, the most conspicuous. "I'll go last," I said. "If they orient on me. The rest of you can reach cover." "No," Amara said immediately. "We don't separate. We don't sacrifice. Ruth said it. All of us or none." I looked at Ruth. She was standing straight, her husband's watch clutched in her hand, her eyes fixed on the park tree line beyond Jefferson Avenue. She nodded once without looking at me. All of us or none. Joan found our window, a gap in the infected distribution, 40 meters of clear road between two clusters. She signaled. We moved. Jefferson Avenue took 90 seconds to cross. 90 seconds of controlled breathing and measured steps and the awful vulnerability of open ground. My crutches tapped the asphalt with sounds that seemed amplified by fear into gunshots. Beside me, Sandra matched my pace, her hand hovering near my elbow, ready to catch, to pull, to do whatever the moment demanded. We reached the median, paused behind a concrete planter that offered psychological cover more than physical. The infected nearest to us, perhaps 30 meters south, continued its drift without orienting. Its back was to us, its head tilted skyward at an angle that suggested it was responding to something airborne. Sound, scent, some stimulus we couldn't perceive. Joan waved us forward. Second half of the avenue, another 40 meters. My arms were burning. Hours on crutches had exhausted muscles never designed for this sustained locomotion. Each swing forward required conscious effort, deliberate recruitment of failing tissues. We made the far sidewalk. The tree line of Riverside Park rose before us, mature oaks and elms creating a canopy that would shelter us from aerial observation, if that mattered, and from the direct sight lines of infected on the surrounding streets. We entered the park through a gap in the ornamental fencing, stepping from concrete onto earth, from exposure into the relative embrace of nature. The park was changed. Not physically. The trees still stood. The pathways still wound through manicured landscape. The pond still reflected the evening sky. But the silence was wrong. Parks have soundscapes. Birds, insects, children, dogs. This park was mute. Even the birds had fled whatever instinct warned them about the new predators walking human paths. We followed the main trail north. Sandra navigated from memory, identifying landmarks, a specific bench, a sculptural fountain, a footbridge over a creek, that confirmed our direction. The group moved in tight formation, alert, every head turning at every sound. For 10 minutes, we encountered nothing. The park appeared empty, the infected perhaps preferring built environments, streets and buildings, and the architecture their bodies remembered. Then, at the footbridge, Kai touched my shoulder and pointed. Ahead, where the trail curved around the pond's northern edge, a group of infected occupied the path. Not 2 or 3, at least 15, clustered in a loose aggregation near the pond's edge. They weren't moving, weren't rattling, just standing in that vacant stillness. Their faces were turned toward the water, as though something in its reflection held their reduced attention. "The bridge goes over them," Joan assessed. "If we cross and stay on the upper path." "The upper path brings us within 10 meters, Sandra objected. "Too close." "Around the pond?" Amara suggested. "West side?" "Adds 20 minutes. We don't have 20 minutes to spare." "We have 4 hours," Dr. Cortez said. "We have 4 hours minus whatever else we encounter. Every minute of margin is survival." I studied the infected group from our position behind the bridge's railing. 15 bodies, oriented toward water, stationary. Their behavior was different from what I'd observed at the hospital. More passive, more collective. Something about the pond's presence, seemed to hold them in a kind of suspension. "They're listening to the water," Ruth said quietly. We all looked at her. She gestured toward the pond. "The creek feeds it. Running water. Continuous sound. It's holding their attention." She was right. I could hear it now. The gentle burble of the creek entering the pond. A constant, natural sound that apparently engaged whatever remained of their auditory processing. They were captured by it, held in place by a sound that offered their reduced minds something to fixate upon. "If the water keeps them occupied," I said slowly, "we pass on the opposite bank. Maximum distance. Silent." Joan nodded. "East side, through the trees. Off trail." Off trail meant uneven ground, my nightmare with crutches, roots, slopes, soft earth that would swallow rubber tips. But it also meant distance from 15 infected figures, and distance was life. "Help me," I said to Kai. He moved to my side immediately, becoming my human crutch. 16 years old, one arm in a cast, bearing my weight against his good shoulder without hesitation. We left the trail. We entered the trees. We went quiet as thought. The eastern tree line was dense with undergrowth. Ferns, fallen branches, the accumulated mulch of seasons. Kai and I moved as a single awkward organism, his strength compensating for my collapse, my remaining crutch serving as a probe for safe footing. Behind us, the others followed in our path, stepping where we stepped, avoiding what we avoided. The infected at the pond never turned. Ruth's observation held. The water sound maintained its grip on their attention, and our passage through the trees at 50 meters distance produced nothing sufficient to override that stimulus. We circled the pond's eastern edge in 12 minutes of careful, breath-held navigation. Beyond the pond, the park thinned. The trees gave way to athletic fields, soccer pitches and baseball diamonds, open ground again. But beyond the fields, visible in the evening light, a chain-link fence, and beyond it the flat roof of a building. Henderson Elementary School. "There," Sandra breathed. The fields were exposed, but appeared empty. The school's position, surrounded by residential streets on 3 sides, the park on the 4th, had apparently not attracted the concentrated infected presence we'd seen at the hospital and on Jefferson Avenue. A few figures were visible on the distant streets, but the fields themselves were clear. We crossed at the best pace we could manage. My ankle had transcended pain. It existed now as a constant condition, as fundamental as gravity, acknowledged and integrated rather than fought. Kai bore my weight without complaint, his jaw set, his breath steady, his youth rising to meet the demand placed upon it. The chain-link fence presented a problem I hadn't anticipated. 6 feet tall, unbreakable without tools, requiring climbing that my body could not perform. Joan found the solution, a gate, chained but not locked. The chain's links merely wrapped rather than secured. She unwound it in seconds, and we passed through into the school's rear playground. Henderson Elementary was a single-story brick building, its windows dark, its parking lot empty except for a single school bus. The helipad, if it existed, wasn't visible from ground level. But Dr. Cortez pointed to the roof. "Flat roof. They'll land on top. There should be roof access inside." The school's rear entrance was a double door, glass-paneled, unlocked. We entered into a hallway of small lockers and construction paper artwork, and the ghost of normalcy so powerful it made my chest constrict. This building had held children yesterday, had echoed with their voices, their movement, their uncomplicated aliveness. The roof access was where public buildings always keep them, a maintenance stairwell at the corridor's end, Access through a door marked Staff Only. We climbed, Kai half carrying me up the single flight, Joan holding the door open at the top. The roof, flat, tarred, unoccupied. And on its surface, painted in aviation orange that glowed in the dying light, a landing circle. Fresh. Painted today, maybe, or yesterday. The paint still tacky at its edges. Dr. Cortez activated the portable radio. National Guard, this is St. Jude survivors. 7 souls at Henderson Elementary rooftop, requesting extraction. Over. The response was immediate, clear, strong, human. Copy. Henderson extraction point. Inbound 23 minutes. Maintain position. Mark your location with light or signal if possible. Over. Sandra opened the emergency flare case she'd carried from the hospital. Red phosphorus ignited, painting our faces in crimson, throwing our shadows long across the school roof. A beacon, a declaration. We stood in a circle around the flare. 7 people who had been strangers 12 hours ago, bound now by the kind of shared extremity that no ordinary life could produce or replicate. Kai's face was streaked with exhaustion. Sandra's hands finally trembled freely, released from the duty of steadiness. Dr. Cortez allowed himself a long exhale. Amara looked at the sky. Joan kept watch even now. Even with rescue 23 minutes away, her vigilance unbroken. Ruth held her husband's watch to her ear, listening for ticking that had stopped, holding it anyway. Below us, in the city, the dead continued their drift. But above us, eventually, we heard it, the distant percussion of rotor blades cutting toward us through the dark. They ask me sometimes what I lost in that hospital. I tell them the obvious things. Mobility in my left ankle that never healed properly. Sleep that comes without pharmaceutical assistance. The ability to enter a medical building without my hands going cold. But those aren't the real losses. I lost the assumption that buildings protect you, that institutions function, that the world will be recognizable from one dawn to the next. I lost Gerald, who told me to leave and who I left. I lost the version of myself who hadn't yet chosen survival over loyalty, and discovered they sometimes demand the same sacrifice. I gained something too. Ruth taught me that grief can be dignified. Kai taught me that courage doesn't require wholeness. Sandra taught me that competence is its own form of heroism. Joan showed me that watchfulness is love expressed in its most practical form. 7 of us went up in that helicopter. 7 survivors from a building that held 400. The mathematics of that survival will never resolve into something I can accept. But we flew. Broken, changed, carrying our dead in every pocket and heartbeat. We flew, and below us, the world we'd known grew small, and what replaced it grew vast. And I understood that surviving was only the first sentence of a much longer story.